Following the fall of Reach, the Pillar of Autumn made its escape by jumping into slip space, making what appeared to be a blind jump. However, the artificial intelligence known as Cortana secretly used coordinates that she had found through Forerunner relics. This led the Pillar of Autumn to arrive at Halo on September 19th, 2552. They were followed by the Covenant, led by Supreme Commander Thel 'Vadamee in his flagship Seeker of Truth. Captain Jacob Keyes had the ship go to Combat Alert Alpha and had the Master Chief woken up from cryosleep and wanted to see him on the bridge. Once there, Captain Keyes informed the Master Chief that he was enacting the Cole Protocol to protect the location of Earth from the Covenant. He gave Cortana to the Chief to protect her and gave the order for everyone to evacuate. He, meanwhile, was planning on crash landing the Pillar of Autumn on the mysterious ring. Covenant started boarding the ship, and Master Chief fought his way to an escape pod. The pod crashes on an alien ring, with Chief being the only survivor. After evading Covenant search parties, Cortana and Chief encounter a group of surviving Marines. After helping to defend them against waves of enemies, they see other escape pods racing down to the surface of the ring. They decide to track down the pods and round up any survivors to give the UNSC a fighting chance for survival. After they completed their task, Cortana informs Master Chief that she's found the location of Captain Keyes, and that he's being held prisoner by the Covenant aboard their ship, the Truth and Reconciliation. The Spartan and a group of Marines fight their way on the ground to a gravity lift which takes them up into the belly of the alien vessel. Fighting their way through many Covenant, the Master Chief found the brig where the captain and other soldiers were being held. Captain Keyes informs Master Chief that while he was being held prisoner, he overheard them calling the ring world Halo. Cortana finds out that the Covenant believe this to be a religious relic that can be used as a weapon with unbelievable power, and that the Covenant is looking for a control room. The captain tells Master Chief and Cortana that their new mission is to beat the Covenant to the control room. Together with the captain, they escape the ship by stealing a Covenant dropship. Cortana tells Chief and the others that there's a map room on this island that the Covenant calls a silent cartographer, and that'll show them the location of the control room. The Master Chief and a group of Marines storm the beach fighting off the Covenant. After capturing the beach, Foehammer drops off a warthog for them. The Master Chief drives around the island until they find a structure inside a cliff wall. Fighting their way inside, they find a Covenant force already there. Master Chief makes his way to the bottom of the structure, and there they find the map room and discover the location of Halo's control room. They try to inform the captain, but he isn't responding. Nevertheless, Chief and Cortana go to the snowy terrain of what appears to be a temple that houses the room they're looking for. As they continue their assault on the control room, they fight against a large Covenant presence. Once inside the control room, the Master Chief plugs Cortana into the terminal, and she accesses information about Halo and immediately tells Chief to go stop Captain Keyes from opening the weapons cache he's looking for, telling him there's no time to explain. The Master Chief leaves Cortana there and gets dropped off in a jungle where the last transmission from the captain was made 12 hours ago. After trudging through the swamp and fighting some Covenant, he makes his way to a structure and ventures his way in. He finds a room with one soldier who was pointing his gun at the Master Chief and was mumbling nonsense. Leaving him, the Spartan moves down the corridor and opens another door where a dead Marine falls into his arms. The Chief lays him down and picks up a nearby UNSC helmet from a fallen soldier. He takes out the camera's memory chip and slots it into the device inside his helmet. His HUD filled up with the video footage from Corporal Jenkins' cam. After fast forwarding, he got to the moment where they were in the same room John was in now. In the video, he could see both Sergeant Johnson and Captain Keyes. Soon they were surrounded by unknown small pod-like creatures who started to attack them. Jenkins' camera quickly goes to black. After Master Chief turns the video off, he soon comes upon the same creatures who attacked the others. Fighting his way, he starts coming across bigger forms of the unknown creatures who are more formidable. The Spartan fights his way out of the structure and makes his way to a nearby tower after hearing to head there for pickup. Once he gets there, he comes across a metallic floating spherical object. It tells him that he is 343 Guilty Spark and the monitor of Installation 04, and that someone has released the flood, and he requires a Spartan's assistance, and he teleports both of them out of the forest. When they reappear, they're now inside of a large structure, different than the ones Master Chief had been in before. The monitor tells him that they are there to retrieve the index from the library so that they can activate Halo's defenses and stop the flood. After fighting through many waves of the flood, the Master Chief is able to reach the index and retrieve it, but just as he grabs it, 343 Guilty Spark takes it due to protocol for safekeeping. Together they make their way back to the control room, and once there, the monitor gives back the index to the Chief and tells him to insert it into the console. As he does so, Cortana shows up out of the console and informs the Chief that Halo is not a weapon that kills the flood, but any sentient species to starve the flood. Cortana absorbs the index, frustrating the monitor, who insists that Halo needs to be activated per protocol. Master Chief pulls Cortana out of the console in time for the Monitor to send his Sentinels to attack them. After fighting their way out of the control room, Cortana tells John that they must destroy Halo using the Pillar of Autumn's fusion reactor. But first they have to find out where the UNSC ship crashed. In the meantime, they devise to slow the Monitor down by damaging 3 pulse generators. After doing so, they know that they will need Captain Key's authorization, so Cortana teleports them to the Truth and Reconciliation to find him. The ship has been overrun with flood, and the Covenant is desperately trying to fight them off. Once Chief gets there, Cortana tells him that the Captain is alive, and that she has a lock on his signal. As the pair make their way through the battlefield, Keyes tries telling them to leave him. John gets to the bridge to find that Captain Keyes has now been assimilated into a flood. Knowing that they need the Captain's neural implant, Chief punches through his skull, pulled out the implant, and after shaking off the flood biomass, inserts it in his helmet. The two make their escape using a Banshee in the hangar. They are barely able to make it to the Pillar of Autumn in it. Now back on the UNSC vessel, they begin fighting through waves of Covenant, Flood, and the Monitor Sentinels. They finally make it to the bridge to initiate an overload of the ship's fusion engines. After starting the self-destruct sequence, the familiar voice of the Monitor can be heard. He's in engineering and aborts the sequence. Chief asks how much firepower it would take to crack the engine shields. She mentions a well-placed grenade, and the new plan is in place. The Sentinels try to kill them on the bridge, but they make it out and work their way down to engineering. Cortana talks the Spartan through how to open the exhaust couplings so they can try detonating the fusion reactors. After destroying 4 of them, Cortana tells them that the ship's engines have gone critical and they only have 15 minutes to get off the ship. Racing against the clock, they get in a Warthog and they work their way to a longsword. The Warthog only gets them so far, so the Spartan has to run the rest of the way on foot, surrounded by a horde of the Flood. They make it to the longsword and he takes off. After making it into space, the Master Chief looks at the ring in time to see the ring explode. John asks Cortana if anyone else made it, and Cortana tells him that they were the only survivors. Cortana says that they did what they had to for Earth, that Halo is finished. The Master Chief takes off his helmet and tells her that he thinks they're just getting started. This chapter of the Halo Saga begins near what remains of Installation 04. Many Covenant vessels have gathered around High Charity, a large ship that acts as the capital city of the Covenant forces. Here, Supreme Commander Thel 'Vadamee is having a hearing in front of the leaders of the Covenant, the Prophets. He is questioned by them about his failure to protect the destroyed Halo. He is labeled a traitor and is stripped of his title, armor, and is physically branded with the mark of shame. Meanwhile, the Master Chief is on board the Cairo station in orbit around the Earth, receiving his Mark VI armor. A ceremony is held to honor Sergeant Johnson, Chief, and Commander Miranda Keyes, daughter of Captain Jacob Keyes, who receives the Colonial Cross in her father's place. Alarms begin to sound indicating that the Covenant have found Earth. Admiral Hood is puzzled by the size of the invasion force, mentioning that the fleet that destroyed Reach was 50 times this size. Admiral Hood orders Master Chief to defend the station. The Chief and Johnson see a Covenant boarding craft latch itself onto the Cairo station. The door between the boarding party and our heroes is broken through and the combat begins. After fighting Covenant throughout the station, soon a Marine notices through a hangar viewport that another station known as the Malta is seeing the Covenant boarding craft appear to be fleeing from the station. Thinking that the UNSC forced the aliens into retreat, the station exploded without warning. After fighting through another hangar, the Athens station also blows up. Cortana indicates that it must be a bomb. The Spartans then tasked with finding the bomb aboard the Cairo station. Chief makes his way to an elevator that will take him to the bomb. John goes in and clears the room of Covenant defenses. With Cortana's help, he deactivates it with very little time left. Master Chief plans to leave the station to give the Covenant back their bomb. Then the Spartan drags the bomb to an empty launch bay. He releases the door controls and the bay begins to decompress quickly. As the bomb slides out past him, he jumps out and grabs one of the spikes on the bomb as it is pulled into space. As he approaches the Covenant carrier below, he activates the bomb and kicks off of it, and the blast helps propel him to land on the UNSC ship in amber clad. Commander Keyes tells Chief that they're taking the fight to the surface. As they reach Old Mombasa, the Master Chief is tasked with capturing the Prophet and finding out why the aliens only landed here. But before a plan of action can be made, the Pelican he was in is shot down by a Scarab. The Spartan and some Marines begin fighting through the streets, and the Spartan comes across a Warthog that is dropped off for him, and he makes his way to the beach where elites are coming down in pods. After fighting his way past them, he makes his way to a tunnel, fighting off many Covenant forces. Cortana mentions that the Covenant almost seems surprised to find the humans here. The Master Chief eventually makes it out of the tunnel, and there he sees the Scarab. Sergeant Johnson drops off a Scorpion tank and the Spartan takes it and fights his way across a large bridge, fighting through the Covenant forces trying to stop him from getting to the Prophet of Regret. After clearing the bridge, he takes the Scorpion down the tunnel and ends up having to leave the tank behind as he makes his way on foot further into the tunnel. He eventually finds an exit and gets back outside, and a Goss Warthog pulls up to the chief and he climbs aboard. Together they make their way to the streets of New Mombasa. The chief runs to a nearby building and gets to the top, where a bridge is right above where the Scarab is about to be. The Master Chief jumps on top of the vehicle and kills all the Covenant on board, and destroys the Scarab. They realize that the Prophet of Regret is leaving the system. They follow the carrier as it jumps into slipspace. Thelvadami is being taken to the Mausoleum of the Arbiter, where the Prophet of Truth will decide the terms of his execution. But they instead offer him to become the next Arbiter and silence the heretic leader and all who follow him. The Arbiter and a team of elites go down to the planet Threshold, using a nearby storm to mask their approach. As they make their way further inside, fighting is happening down below the transparent floor between the heretics and the Flood. Moving forward, they come across a room with dead bodies strewn about. A small orb comes, and the holographic image of the heretic leader appears. He mentions that he is flattered the Arbiter sent after him. After the communication stops, the Flood appear. After clearing the room of the Flood, they go through a doorway and find an elevator. After they leave the elevator to head back outside, they get to a large room where the leader's on the other side of the shielded door, where he locks himself inside. The Arbiter devises a plan to force the heretic leader out by cutting the cable holding up the station. The plan succeeds and the leader flees on a Banshee before the Arbiter can get to him. He follows in a Banshee of his own. The Arbiter makes his way to the heretic leader. He asks the heretic where he learned his lies, and 343 Guilty Spark flies down to meet the pair. We realize now that he is the Oracle who is ready to answer the Arbiter's questions. But before the Arbiter can ask anything, the heretic leader attacks the Arbiter. The leader activates two small hologram orbs that create lifelike images of himself. After fighting and finally killing the heretic leader, 343 regrets his death. The Arbiter says he had no choice. The 343 is pulled to the gravity hammer of Tartarus. The Brute tells the Arbiter that they're leaving the system. Meanwhile, Master Chief and the others, while following the Prophet's carrier through slipspace, arrive at another Halo, Installation 05. The Spartan is tasked with capturing the Prophet of Regret, and gets down to the surface of the ring via a drop pod along with some ODSTs. They clear a landing zone and a Warthog is dropped off for them. They believe the Prophet to be located in a temple above the lake. But to get there, they fight through the Covenant to extend a bridge. Another Pelican arrives and drops off a Scorpion tank to fight off the Wraiths up ahead. The Master Chief passes through a multitude of Forerunner ruins, making his way to a massive temple, where Cortana listens to a hologram of Regret and translates that he's planning on activating Halo. A new plan is made where Commander Keyes and Sergeant Johnson is going to reach the library to get the index before the Covenant do, and the Master Chief and Cortana are sent to silence the Prophet permanently. They leave the structure fighting many Covenant, and Chief makes his way to a gondola towards the temple over the lake. He looks up and sees multiple Covenant ships arriving from slipspace, including High Charity. Cortana mentions that this is the largest fleet any humans have encountered. They hurry off into the temple and assassinate the Prophet. As soon as they get outside, Cortana informs them that the fleet is getting ready to fire on their position. The Chief runs, trying to outrun the blast, and jumps into the lake below. As Chief sinks, a pair of tentacles reaches out and grabs him, saying, "This is not your grave, but you are welcome in it." Meanwhile, the Arbiter is on board High Charity and sees brutes taking the honor guards' helmets and weapons. The elite commander who helped the Arbiter track down the heretic leaders being told that the brutes will be the Prophet's protectors since the elites failed to protect the Prophet of Regret. The Arbiter is told that the oracle that they found on Threshold told them of the sacred icon, and the Arbiter is to get to it before the humans do. When he eventually reaches the library, he realizes that the humans beat him to it. Commander Keyes and Sergeant Johnson have just retrieved it. The Arbiter fights them in an effort to retrieve the index from the woman, but before he can, Tartar shows up and takes it for himself, captures the two humans, and blasts the Arbiter into a deep pit. The Master Chief wakes up and realizes that he's being held by some large flood-like creature known as Gravemind, and he's soon joined by other prisoners, the Monitor for Installation 05, a flood-infected Prophet of Regret, and the latest addition, the Arbiter. After a brief discussion, the Flood teleports Chief and the Arbiter to two different locations. Master Chief is teleported on board High Charity, while the Prophet of Truth is telling the Covenant that they have the Sacred Index and the Great Journey is near. As soon as the Chief arrives, the Prophets flee and he is forced to fight the Covenant. After clearing out the room, he inserts Cortana into a nearby terminal. John leaves her to go after the Prophet, who is moving to the lower levels of the tower. Cortana mentions that the Covenant forces are starting to attack each other. Just then, the UNSC vessel in amber clad flies overhead and crashes into a nearby tower. As they continue to catch up to the Prophet of Truth, they see elites fighting brutes. Cortana informs the chief that she can see 2 transponders, one for Commander Keyes and the other for Sergeant Johnson, and she advises John to go help them. Keyes and Johnson are split up. The Prophet of Truth gives Tartarus the index just as the Flood arrive. The brutes fight them off, but one of the Flood infection forms attacks the Prophet of Mercy. Tartarus goes to kill the Flood who's taking a hold of the Prophet, but Truth stops him, saying that the great journey waits for no one. We see that the Arbiter was teleported to a cliff edge near Delta Halo's control room. After fighting off waves of brutes, the Arbiter eventually runs into the elite commander. Overhead, the pair see Phantoms dropping off Tartarus, Commander Keyes, and 343 to the control room. The Master Chief comes across a struggle between the Prophet of Mercy and the Flood infection form. He asks where Truth is headed. The dying Prophet tells him that he's headed to Earth. The Master Chief then kills the Flood, which immediately kills the Prophet as well. Cortana realizes that there's a Forerunner ship in the center of High Charity, and that the Prophet of Truth is headed straight for it. She tells him that he must get to Truth. John mentions that the brutes have the commander and the index and can activate Halo. She tells him if they try, that she will detonate the Inamber-Clad's reactor to destroy the ring. He goes to pull her from the system, but she says she doesn't want to risk a remote detonation and that she needs to stay behind. A Pelican crashes nearby with Flood pouring out of the ship. John leaves her and fights his way through a now Flood-infected High Charity. He enters a green conduit that takes him to the Forerunner ship, but just barely in time as it takes off. Chief promises to come back for Cortana, and she tells him, "Don't make a girl promise if you know you can't keep it." The Forerunner ship jumps into slipspace. Meanwhile, the Arbiter runs into Sergeant Johnson, who is commandeered a Scarab. The two form an unlikely truce to stop Tartarus from activating Halo. The Arbiter takes a Banshee and provides cover as they move to attack the control room. Once there, the Scarab blasts an opening. The Arbiter shows up just as Tartarus is trying to force Commander Keyes to activate the ring. He tries to plead with the brute, telling him that the prophets were wrong, and to prove it, he asked 343 what the purpose of Halo was and the fate of the Forerunners, to which he said they were killed as planned after activating Halo. Tartarus throws 343 at Sergeant Johnson and forces Commander Keyes to activate Halo. The Arbiter kills Tartarus, and after the battle, Miranda runs and grabs Index from the terminal. The built-up energy initiates a beacon to communicate with the other Halo installations, putting them all on standby and ready for remote activation. Commander Keyes asks 343 Guilty Spark where someone would go to activate the rings from. He tells them the Ark. The Forerunner ship with the Prophet of Truth and Master Chief aboard arrive at Earth. The Chief communicates with Admiral Hood, who asks him what is he doing on that ship. He responds, "Sir, finishing this fight." Then, back aboard High Charity, we see it overrun with infestation. Gravemind, who tells Cortana that he has questions and that she will answer. She says, "Alright, shoot." This chapter of the Halo Saga begins as John 117 crashes in an African jungle. He's found by Sergeant Johnson and some Marines. As Master Chief comes to, he sees an invisible elite and grabs a pistol and charges at the alien before Johnson tells him that the Arbiter is with them. The group makes their way to an extraction point, splitting up to do so as covertly as possible. The Master Chief is beginning to get what appears to be cryptic messages from Cortana. Eventually fighting through the jungle, they come across a dam and see that Johnson is now captured. They free him and get in the Pelican coming to pick them up. They land in an underground UNSC base. Commander Miranda Keyes welcomes the Spartan back and updates him that the UNSC is losing the battle for Earth, and that the Covenant have been digging in East Africa, and that the Prophet of Truth is looking for the Ark on Earth. As they devise a plan to strike back at the Covenant, the power goes out, and the Prophet of Truth comes on screen telling them there's no escaping their fates. The power comes back on and Commander Keyes orders everyone to evacuate, and then the Covenant attack the base. Master Chief and the Arbiter help fight back against the aliens, clearing out a hangar for a chance of escape. They are then told to head back to the Ops Center to arm the bomb to destroy the base and any remaining enemies there. After doing so, they then head to the hangar to get to a service elevator to escape. But an explosion above goes off. The pair are now with some Marines in an underground garage. Commander Keyes tells them to head into the town of Voy. Using the vehicles nearby, they lead the soldiers out of the base and make it to Voy. Keyes tells the Admiral the Ark is fully uncovered. Knowing that there isn't much time left to stop the Prophet of Truth from activating the Halo rings, they devise a plan to attack him with a surprise aerial assault. The Master Chief and the Arbiter are tasked with clearing out the Covenant's anti-air defenses. After taking out 2 anti-air wraiths, a Scarab unexpectedly arrives. The Spartan and Elite destroy it in a violent explosion. Now John and the others have one last target, an anti-air cannon. They fight their way up the hill, full of Covenant guarding the large weapon. Together the pair clear out the enemy forces and destroy the cannon, clearing the way for Admiral Hood's fleet. The UNSC ships begin to attack the Forerunner dreadnought, but the ship appears to be unscathed by the volleys. The Forerunner structure beneath the ship begins to open up and the dreadnought is lowered deeper into the structure. A blue beam begins to shine from the top of the ship and begins to grow thicker, sending a shockwave as everything turns to black. The chief gets back to his feet and sees a large sphere of black and blue light hovering in the sky. The nearby ships, both human and alien alike, are drifting in the air. Then Truth's dreadnought begins to rise from the ground and enters the sphere. The rest of the Covenant fleet follows him into the portal. Just then, a Covenant battlecruiser enters the atmosphere through slipspace. It crashes near Chief and Arbiter's position. The Spartan immediately realizes that the Flood have reached Earth. The Flood wastes no time in spreading throughout the city of Voy. Commander Keyes tells the Spartan and Elite to get to the crashed ship and overload it, destroying the city as well as the Flood. As the pair fight through waves of Flood, Master Chief receives a warning from Cortana. "Chief, I can't tell you everything. It's not safe. The Gravemind. It knows I'm in the system." Shortly afterwards, the Allied Covenant vessel, the Shadow of Intent, arrives and begins to aid in fighting the Flood. The Elites are looking for Cortana, and John is told that she's on the infected ship. Once an entrance is found, the Spartan goes in alone. Once on board, Gravemind communicates with the Master Chief saying, "Do not be afraid. I am peace. I am salvation." The Chief makes his way through the ship and finds the terminal where Cortana is. Chief sees her, and she begins to speak, but is silenced when her hologram flickers and disappears. Then 343 Guilty Spark flies down and uses a beam to try to repair the Covenant device housing Cortana. John pulls the monitor back to prevent him from hurting the device, explaining that 343 tried to kill Cortana and tried to kill him on Halo. 343 quips back that they destroyed Halo, but that he's going to help John. Reluctantly, the Spartan allows the monitor to take possession of the Covenant device. The pair use a gravity lift to enter in a Covenant Phantom. The city of Voy is now being glassed from the Allied Covenant to ensure the Flood infestation is eradicated. Now on board the Shadow of Intent, the leadership of the UNSC and Allied elites are watching 343 try to salvage the device to save Cortana. After a moment, Cortana's hologram appears. She begins to warn the Chief about the Flood coming to Earth. The Spartan realizes it's just a message. As the group listens to the rest of Cortana's words, they hear that there's a way to stop the Flood on the other side of the portal. A debate ensues on what the best course of action is. Chief offers to go to the other side of the portal to find Cortana's solution. Admiral Hood stays behind on Earth while the rest of the group goes through the portal. Once there, they see another Forerunner artifact different than any they've seen before. The elite ships begin to attack the brute ships above the artifact. 6 Pelicans drop out of the UNSC frigate forward unto dawn and descend to the surface to find the Prophet of Truth. Master Chief and a pair of ODSTs make landfall. The team is tasked with creating a safe landing zone for the Forward Unto Dawn. As they fight waves of brutes and the Loyalists, Sergeant Johnson comments on seeing what looks to be the cartographer of this installation. They clear an LZ for Commander Keyes and the ship lands and UNSC vehicles are dispatched to fight their way to the cartographer. They learn that the Forerunner artifact they're on is actually the Ark, which sits beyond the rim of the Milky Way galaxy. 343 mentions that the Prophet has triggered a barrier around the Ark's core. 3 teams are dispatched to take down the 3 shield generators, with the Chief set to take down the first one, the Elites the second, and Johnson the third. Chief's Pelican crash lands after being hit. Master Chief and some Marines destroy the nearby anti-air tank and clear a small landing zone where a Pelican drops off a Warthog, which the Spartan takes to the tower and fights his way to the controls where he deactivates the first part of the barrier. The Arbiter shuts down the second tower moments after, but Johnson's tower isn't deactivating. The Chief makes his way outside and takes a Hornet to the third tower. The Spartan deactivates the third tower, the barrier falls. Just then, High Charity arrives through slipspace and several Flood dispersal pods are dispatched, one of which flies through the window that the Chief is at. After fighting his way out of the tower, he gets in a Scorpion tank. Shooting his way through multiple Covenant, he finally gets near the Citadel where the Prophet of Truth is. He then takes another Hornet to get to the Citadel when 2 Scarabs drop down in front of the structure. Once the 2 Scarabs have been destroyed, 343 activates a bridge to the Citadel. The Master Chief and Arbiter head inside alone. They pass view screens that show the Prophet saying that he's about to light the rings. Johnson is seen on the viewport as a prisoner. Commander Keyes asks the Chief how close they are. The Chief looks up the elevator in front of them and says not close enough. Sergeant Johnson is trying to goad the brute to kill him, but the Prophet sees this and stops him. The Sergeant is brought before the Consul and is about to be forced to activate the Ark when a Pelican crashes through the glass behind them. It's Commander Keyes who's come to save Sergeant Johnson and stop Truth. But she quickly realizes that there's too many of them. She aims her pistol at Johnson, who tells her to shoot him then her, but she hesitates and is shot in the back by the Prophet with a spiker. He forces Johnson's hand to the Consul and the Ark is activated. The Chief and the Arbiter step off the elevator when the Flood arrives and propose a truce to stop Truth. The unlikely alliance makes their way to the Prophet. They see Sergeant Johnson holding Commander Key's body. The Arbiter picks up the Prophet, who is beginning to be infected by Gravemind. The Master Chief deactivates the Ark, and the Arbiter kills the Prophet of Truth with his energy sword. The pair see Johnson as he carries the Commander's corpse to the Pelican. The ground begins to shake and large tentacles rise up around them. Gravemind laughs. Johnson takes off in the Pelican, and the duo try to climb aboard but are knocked down by the Flood's tentacles. Johnson tells the Chief he can barely keep control of the Pelican and that they will need to find their own way out. The lift isn't working, so they jump down a shaft. A flickering image of Cortana running around a nearby corner is seen by John. He follows it and activates the terminal she disappears near. The view screen opens up and they can see an incomplete Halo ring meant to be a replacement for the one that the Master Chief destroyed. The Spartan tells 343 that he will light the ring, to which the Monitor gets excited and leaves to make preparations. John leaves in a Banshee to go to High Charity to save Cortana and get the index she has to activate the new Halo ring. John fights his way through the flood-infested ship and finds Cortana. She seems weakened and isn't sure that he found her in time. He reminds her that he promised her that he'd come back for her. This seems to re-energize her, and he asks her if she has the index from the first Halo. She reveals that she does, and he puts her into his helmet. She tells John that he needs to destroy High Charity to buy them some time. They start the chain reaction and meet up with the Arbiter, who Cortana is surprised to see. They make their way off of the ship in a Pelican. They land near the control room on the new ring, and Gravemind sends all he can to stop them from reaching it. Sergeant Johnson arrives to help fight the Flood. Eventually making their way to it, Chief gives Johnson Cortana's chip. 343 shows up and cheerfully tells Johnson that the ring should be ready to fire in a few more days. Johnson begins to activate the ring, and 343 says that a premature firing will destroy the ring and the Ark. The blue light turns red, and he blasts Johnson with his energy beam. The Monitor then turns and fires at John, who is knocked back with his shields depleted. The Arbiter gets hit with the blast next. The Chief begins to fight 343 Guilty Spark, but his weapons seem to have no effect, and the Monitor is using a repulsor field to keep the Spartan at bay. After a few moments, Johnson shoots his Spartan laser at the Monitor, and he flies away, giving Chief the opportunity to reach Johnson. John takes the laser and uses it to destroy 343. Johnson dies in the Spartan's arms as he gives Cortana back to the Chief and says, "Send me out," with a bang. Cortana activates Halo, and the Chief and Arbiter rush out of the control room. They get in a Warthog and head towards the Forward Unto Dawn, while parts of the new ring explode around them. They gun it and land in the bay of the UNSC ship. The Arbiter makes his way to the bridge and sits down at the controls while John inserts Cortana into a terminal in the hangar, and she flies them away from the Ark. Cortana tells John that if they don't make it, that it was a pleasure serving with him. A memorial is held back on Earth for those lost in the war. The Forward Unto Dawn had been split in half by the explosion of the Ark, and the Arbiter was the only one who made it to Earth. After the memorial, where we see the numbers 117 scratched into the surface of the memorial, the Arbiter leaves and tells the shipmaster to take them home, and the Shadow of Intent leaves Earth. The Master Chief and Cortana both survived in the other half of Forward Unto Dawn, floating in unknown space. He goes into cryosleep where they hope for rescue, telling her, "Wake me when you need me." The ship is shown to be drifting near Requiem. This chapter begins with Dr. Halsey, the scientist behind the Spartan program, being interrogated about the ethics. But then the conversation quickly turns to John, and she realizes that they want to make more Spartans to replace the older ones. She tells the interrogator not to underestimate John. The Forward Unto Dawn has been drifting in space for over 4 years, when an orange energy pulse moves through the ship. Cortana looks over the status of the ship and realizes that there's intruders on board. She activates the cryotube that the Master Chief is in. He wakes up and grabs Cortana's chip and inserts it into his helmet. They make their way to find the intruders, and another orange pulse moves through the ship. John asks Cortana what that is. She tells him it's an unknown sensor scan. He comes across an elite with an energy sword, and the Spartan quickly kills him. The Master Chief says, "I thought we had a truce with the Covenant." She responds that a lot can happen in 4 years. They fight against more Covenant, and then they open the blast shield to see what's outside of the ship. And a large fleet of Covenant vessels are there, one of which is on a collision course with their ship. Some boarding craft latch onto the Chief's position, and he fights them off. She tells him that since the ship was torn in half, the weapon systems have to be activated from the outer deck. John makes his way to an airlock, and purple static fields appear on his HUD, and Cortana's voice appears distorted. Chief expresses concern, but she tells him it's nothing. Once they make their way to the hull, Cortana points out the Forerunner planet above them. They activate the weapon systems, and the vessel that was on a collision course is destroyed. A beam of orange light erupts from the Forerunner planet and scans the Master Chief. The planet begins to open up, sucking in nearby Covenant ships and the Forward Unto Dawn. The Chief starts to head to an escape pod, but the ship's hull integrity gets weaker the more the pull of the planet has on them. The Chief never makes it to an escape pod as the gravity sucks him into the Forerunner planet. The Master Chief wakes up on the surface of the planet, having crashed down. Cortana begins to act strangely, and the Chief gets her to explain that she was put into service 8 years ago, and that AIs deteriorate after 7. The Chief says that they just need to find Dr. Halsey, who created Cortana. She says that she won't recover from rampancy. He says that Dr. Halsey can fix this. She replies, "Don't make a girl a promise you can't keep." A Covenant Phantom and a pair of Banshees flies overhead, and the pair move out. They look for a ship that can get them back home. Cortana tells the Master Chief that there's a faint transmission that doesn't appear to be Covenant. They grab a functioning warthog from part of the crash. They keep detecting the Phantom signal, and they find a console and discover that they are on what's called a shield world, known as Requiem. They also discover that a UNSC ship called Infinity is nearby, but they can't communicate with it yet, so they work their way to a terminus, and multiple unknown Forerunner units teleport inside. A portal is created, and the pair jump through. The portal takes them close to Requiem's core, but they discover they can't contact the Infinity until they disable 2 pylons that are creating interference. They engage the new Promethean enemies. They soon discover that the UNSC Infinity is actually outside of the planet and will be sucked into Requiem if the pair don't warn them. They disable the pylons and the interference is gone, but the Mjolnir's armor transmitter isn't strong enough. They go through another portal to find a way to communicate with the human vessel and see a large sphere with orange patterns. They fight their way near the sphere and touch the 2 small pillars to start the communication. The sphere begins to rise and orange shockwaves erupts from it. The Master Chief sees a small opening under the sphere where a small capsule floats down and opens, revealing a kneeling humanoid. And once he stands, his armor attaches itself to him. He waves his hand, and the nearby Promethean Knight's blue highlights turn to orange, revealing he now controls them. The Covenant leader, Jul Imdama, bows and says "Didact." The armored being begins to talk to the Chief, hiding behind a metal barrier that disintegrates. The Chief goes to aim his assault rifle at the Didact, and in response, the alien reaches out his hand and telekinetically binds the Chief, making him unable to move. He pulls John closer and tells him it's clear that the humans have not attained the mantle and that the Forerunners have returned. The Didact throws John to the wall and retreats back into the sphere known as the Cryptum. As the Spartan stands, Cortana tells him that there's a slip space rupture and to run. Another orange pulse hits the Chief as he is knocked unconscious. When he regains consciousness, Cortana reveals that the Didact had manipulated the Infinity signal to get them to release him. She tells him that the Requiem's core has been destabilized, and that the Didact is leaving, that they need to find a portal out of the core. They find a ghost and race out of the area and into a portal. The portal takes them back to the surface of the shield world, and there they see the UNSC Infinity on a crash course for the planet. The Didact's Cryptum chases after the human vessel, and the pair make their way to follow. They fight their way through a jungle and finally come to a door that opens up, and a few Spartan 4s and an officer appear. The officer is Tom Lasky, first officer of the Infinity. The Master Chief is then tasked to clear an LZ. They find a door. Cortana is trying to hack in while the Spartan's defending the area. After asking how much longer, she snaps at him. She apologizes to him, and they come across a Promethean Knight who's giving orders to the Covenant. They are surprised to see the 2 factions working together. They clear an LZ and board a Pelican. The Pelican drops Chief off near the Infinity, which is under attack, and he boards a tank fighting his way to the downed vessel. Once the inside of the hangar is cleared, the Master Chief is told by Captain Del Rio to take a Mantis and fight off the Covenant to get to the upper hull. There he sees the Cryptum, as UNSC's ship fires at the Didact's Cryptum. The Didact retreats and the Infinity manages to take off. Captain Del Rio, Lasky, Spartan Palmer, Chief, and Cortana are gathered on the bridge. They discuss the Prometheans, and the captain mentions that they haven't seen them on the other installations. It's then that the Master Chief and Cortana are told that the Infinity's mission is to locate the remaining Halo rings, establish permanent bases, and study them for decommission. They inform them they have bases already set up on Installation 03 and 05. Information found on the 3rd ring gave the UNSC coordinates to Requiem. The pair are told that they're leaving Requiem once they disable the gravity well, trapping them there. The 2 protest, but the captain's orders stand. The Master Chief goes with some Spartan 4s and Marines to disable the particle cannons, protecting the gravity well. Cortana has another rampant episode, and the duo make their way into a Forerunner structure. She comments that it's almost like the Sentinels wanted them to take the particle cannons offline. The Chief plugs Cortana into a console, and she is trying to aim the cannons at one another when she says there's something in here, and then disappears from the console and isn't responding to the Spartan. The Chief follows a new path that seems to have opened up to him, and he sees Cortana in a beam of blue light. He goes to her and finds himself in front of a figure who reveals herself to be what is left of the Forerunner, known as the Librarian. left behind to help the humans assume the mantle of responsibility, but that the plan is at risk by the Didact, and he mustn't be allowed to leave Requiem. She goes on to tell him that the Didact is seeking the Composer, a device to finally defeat the Forerunner's greatest enemy, humans. The librarian goes on to tell the story of mankind and their violent expansion into space until the Didact defended the Forerunners with his warrior servants. After a millennia of war between the humans and Forerunners, the Didact finally won, but at a cost. Then they realized that the humans were actually running from the Flood. The Forerunners, weakened from their war with humanity, were no match for the infestation. The Didact originally planned to use the Composer to turn living beings into digital ones to prevent the Flood from infecting them. He used the Composer on humans to further build his army to fight the Flood. He was then imprisoned for his crimes in the Cryptum. And that she planted the seeds of humanity so that we would rise again and be the Forerunners' inheritors. The Didact finds them, and the librarian quickly tells him that in the humans she placed a way to shield them from the Composer, but that it must be activated. She tells him that he cannot stop the Didact without it. He tells her to do it, so she advances his evolution to protect him. He is immediately attacked by the Prometheans, but is able to fight them off and retrieve Cortana. They go through a portal back to where the UNSC is fighting near the gravity well, and the Chief helps to destroy it. Captain Del Rio, Lasky, Spartan Palmer, Chief, and Cortana are gathered on the bridge once again. The captain doesn't believe that the Didact is as big of a threat as Chief and Cortana say, and refuses to go after him. Cortana flickers red and angrily sends a wave of energy as she screams at Del Rio, causing displays to flicker and spark. She almost instantly returns to her normal state, embarrassed, and says she didn't mean to do that. The captain orders Lasky to remove her chip and retire it for final. Chief grabs the chip and defies the captain's orders, clarifying that if the captain won't do anything about the Didact, he will. The captain orders that the Master Chief be arrested, but no one moves to do so. The Chief tells Lasky to warn Earth, and then he leaves the bridge. As the Chief and Cortana prepare to leave the Infinity, she says to him, "Before this is all over, promise me you'll figure out which one of us is the machine." Lasky comes up and tells the Spartan that he had a Pelican prepped for him and wishes him luck. Cortana tells him that the best way to stop the Didact from fighting the Composer is to keep him from leaving Requiem. Cortana devises a plan to get through the Didact's shields. Master Chief begins to hear the Didact speaking, but Cortana doesn't hear anything. They fly to a spire to use the controls to block the Didact's path. Once there, Cortana gains control and has another rampant episode that makes her lose control, which allows for the Didact to escape. The Master Chief plans to board onto one of the Covenant Liches and jumps. He lands on one and he sees the Cryptum plummeting to the ground, and flies into the Didact's larger vessel known as the Mantle's Approach, which takes to the sky with the Covenant following it. The surface of Requiem parts and allows the ships to leave the planet. They jump through slip space with Master Chief aboard. They come out of slip space near Halo Ring, Installation 03. The Composer is on board a UNSC station built into an asteroid. Master Chief sends a communication to Dr. Sandra Tilson to protect the Composer. The communication is cut short as Cortana has yet another rampant episode that ends up crashing the Lich into the station. Once aboard the station, he gets the Doctor's coordinates and fights through waves of Covenant on his way to her. After reaching her, the Master Chief tells her that they have to move the Composer right away. She says they don't have the ability to do that. He has Cortana check the manifest, who reveals they have enough nukes to destroy it. The Doctor says that she will make it so that the nukes can be activated remotely. The Covenant finds the Composer and the Chief defends it. The Chief then tells the Doctor to get the nuke down there immediately. They lose communication with the Doctor and head to retrieve the explosive. A large wave hits the building and the roof comes off, exposing the Composer to space, with the Didact vessel just outside of the station. It fires an orange beam into the atrium, pulling the Composer out of the asteroid. The Chief tells Cortana to find Dr. Tilson, and Cortana can't seem to focus. The Chief tells her only to focus on the Doctor, and together they find her. The Chief plugs Cortana in the system and tells her to look for a ship that can take a nuke up in it. Just then, the Doctor says that something is happening as she's looking out of the viewport at the Composer, which is looking to be charging up energy. The Master Chief asks Cortana if she has access to the defense systems. She says they're not responding. She keeps trying but isn't able to raise them in time as the energy disperses throughout the system and vaporizes everyone on board except for the Chief, who's knocked unconscious. When he wakes up, Cortana's shaken up. She tells him that they'll pair you with another AI, maybe even another Cortana model if Halsey lets them. John reassures her that's not going to happen. She says it won't be me. You know that, right? He doesn't respond, and she says that there's a broadsword in the hangar, and comments whatever the librarian did to him worked. He says, "Cortana, it's not over. Not yet." She replies sadly, "Not yet." They take off in the broadsword with a nuke equipped to it. The Didact begins to jump into slip space. He quickly flies to the Didact ship just in time to get inside the shield as it jumps to Earth. The Spartan tries to hail the Infinity, and Lasky responds, letting the Chief know that Captain Del Rio was relieved of command due to abandoning the Chief at Requiem. The duo reach the composer, but the Didact closes the entrance. The group makes a plan to punch a hole big enough for Chief and Cortana to get in, using the firepower on the Infinity, which makes a clean hit to the surface, allowing them to get inside. The Master Chief takes the nuke with him as they make their way deeper into the Didact ship. They fight their way through Prometheans, and the Spartan inserts Cortana into the system, and the Didact finds out she's in the system and is starting to fight with her. She says that she can't fight the Didact and herself simultaneously. The Didact begins to power up the composer as he shields himself inside of it. The Chief puts Cortana into the system, and she injects her rampant personality spikes into the system to overwhelm the shields. Once the shields finally drop, the composer fires at Earth, hitting the city of New Phoenix. Chief goes to grab Cortana out of the console, but it is destroyed before he can do so. The Master Chief fights through more Prometheans, and he can hear Cortana's rampant voice telling him to destroy the composer. He reaches a light bridge. John cautiously walks down the bridge looking out for the Didact. Seeing the beam up ahead, he can see the Didact in it before he soon vanishes. The Master Chief continues his way forward, then turns and aims at the Didact when he hears him speak behind him. The Didact telekinetically pushes the Spartan away. The nuclear warhead is separated from him as he slides back into a ready position. He then races for the warhead, but the Didact aims his hand at John, and the Spartan is frozen in place. Just then, 7 copies of Cortana rise out of the light bridge. The Didact tells Cortana that her compassion for mankind is misplaced. She says she's not doing this for mankind. The copies jump and hold the Didact still, and the Master Chief falls. He then climbs up from the bridge and pulls out a pulse grenade. Dashing towards the struggling alien, John plants the grenade in his enemy's chest. The pulse grenade detonates, and the Didact reels from the blast and falls off of the bridge into the swirling energy below. The Spartan then crawls to the Havoc bomb, primes the nuke, and after taking one last look at Earth, the Master Chief detonates the bomb. John comes to inside a blue room made of hard light. He stands up and calls out to Cortana. A bright blue light is coming from behind him. He turns around and sees Cortana walking towards him. Now life-size, she tells him that he succeeded in stopping the Didact. He looks around and asks how they're going to get out of here. She tells him, "I'm not coming with you this time." She says that most of me is down there. I only held enough back to get you off the ship. He says he's not leaving her there. She walks up to him and touches his breastplate. She sighs and says, "I've waited so long to do that." He tells her it was my job to take care of you. She says we were supposed to take care of each other, and we did. She sadly smiles, and he pleads with her. As she begins to back away out of the room, he says, "Wait." She says, "Welcome home, John." And she fades into the hard light of the wall. The Didact ship begins falling apart around him. He's found in the wreckage and is soon standing on the Infinity, looking out at Earth. Captain Lasky asks to join him, and he tries to comfort John about Cortana's death. The Spartan just says, "Our duty as soldiers is to protect humanity, whatever the cost." Lasky tells the Chief that soldiers aren't machines. Master Chief said, "She said that to me once, about being a machine." Master Chief goes and gets his armor removed for the first time in years. The story begins with Dr. Halsey when she talks to Spartan Jameson Locke, telling him that she's been with Oni long enough to know that when it's all over, after everything that she's done, he will be ordered to kill them both. Later, Fireteam Osiris, a team of Spartan 4s led by Locke, are told that 5 colonies have experienced massive destruction in the last 72 hours that were Forerunner in origin. Dr. Halsey has contacted the UNSC and claims to have information on these attacks. The team gets orders from Captain Lasky and Spartan Palmer to retrieve Dr. Halsey, who's with the Covenant Supreme Leader Jul Imdama on Kamchatka, and return her to the UNSC Infinity. And if the opportunity presents itself, take out the Covenant leader. Osiris jumps out of the Pelican and engages the Covenant and Promethean forces on the ground as they head towards the Forerunner structure that Dr. Halsey and Jul Imdama are in. Before they reach the Doctor, a Covenant Kraken is seen. They finally make it to Dr. Halsey and Imdama. Halsey says to the leader, "This location does not serve my needs. When she makes another transmission, I must triangulate," and she's interrupted by Jul when he says that she's been chasing shadows for weeks to no avail. Just then, Fireteam Osiris opens fire on the guards, and after a small skirmish, the Covenant guards and Jul Imdama are dead. Halsey is taken back to the Infinity with Captain Lasky and Spartan Palmer waiting for her. The Doctor says, "Captain Lasky, I sent you my position 3 weeks ago. I told you this was happening." The man tells her they will discuss it in private, and then Halsey asks, "What has she done? How far is it already gone?" But she is taken into custody by Spartan Palmer and Lasky before any more is said. The Master Chief is piloting a Pelican with the rest of Blue Team composed of Spartan 2s on board. He looks at his helmet and turns it around and slides his thumb over the AI port. In the back of the Pelican, Spartan Frederick 104 is talking to fellow Spartans Kelly 087 and Linda 058 about his concerns with how much Chief is pushing himself, taking too many missions without a break. John 117 then slides his helmet on and contacts the Infinity, telling him that Blue Team has found Argent Moon with signs of hostile activity. The Spartan is told to clear the ship of Covenant. He heads back into the Pelican Bay, and as he's about to jump, Fred asks him if he's good. He nods, and the team enter the ship via a window, and as they are clearing out the rest of the ship of Covenant, a lone hunter jumps out as a nearby crate knocks down the bridge that the Chief is on, sending him plummeting. John lands at the bottom of a rocky cave. He tries to hail the rest of Blue Team, but he gets no response. He hears a faint whisper from behind him say Chief. He turns and sees a small blue light and heads towards it. When he gets closer, he notices that it's an AI chip. He goes to reach it, but it vanishes before he can touch it. He hears someone say his name, and he starts moving towards the sound. He reaches a ledge, and he hears Cortana say, Chief, the domain is open. Meridian is next. John, the reclamation's about to begin. Before he can answer, a rumble is heard and a large Forerunner construct rises out of the ground, then the Chief passes out. When he comes to, he's back on the station and is surrounded by Blue Team. They ask him what's wrong, and he tells them that Cortana is on Meridian. John tells them to focus on the mission. They continue clearing the ship, and several Covenant ships are entering the system. To deny the Covenant the ship, the team destroys it, taking a Prowler to escape in. The Master Chief contacts Infinity to inform him that the ship is destroyed and that Blue Team is going to Meridian for possible contact with Cortana. But Infinity denies his request, saying that another team is already being prepared to deal with her. John says negative to Infinity, and the rest of Blue Team volunteer to go with him to Meridian. Aboard the Infinity, Dr. Halsey tells Lasky that Cortana is no longer an asset, she is a danger. And she has access to the Forerunner domain, which allows her to control whatever device causes damage. Lasky informs her that John went AWOL in search of Cortana. The Infinity AI known as Roland snaps at everyone for ignoring his questions about Cortana and asks why is Cortana the problem, because she refused to die when she was supposed to? Spartans Locke and Buck of Fireteam Osiris are gearing up for the next mission, which is to retrieve Blue Team from Meridian. Buck is telling him that this isn't just another target, and asks how they will bring the Spartan 2s in. Locke demonstrates an armor restraint that locks up a Spartan's armor. Buck tells him that the other soldiers are going to hate them for this mission. Locke just responds that Buck's not the only one here because of the Master Chief. Fireteam Osiris descends onto Meridian, a frontier planet outside of UNSC jurisdiction, via a space elevator. As they get closer to the surface, they see Forerunner ships. Governor Sloan is surprised they're there and doesn't want their help. Osiris helps anyways, making their way to Meridian Station while fighting through waves of Prometheans. Governor Sloan becomes more welcoming after they help save a lot of his people. Once inside Meridian Station, they see that Governor Sloan is an AI, and one with rampancy at that. They tell Sloan that they're looking for another team of Spartans. He asks why there's so many Spartans on Meridian, and then quickly tells him that he's unaware of any other UNSC forces, but that they're welcome to check. And after talking to some of the locals, they discover that Apogee Station came under attack, and then a UNSC ship was heading that way. The team takes a Pelican to Apogee to find Blue Team. Fireteam Osiris gets to Apogee Station to find that Governor Sloan sent an escort of his own people to keep an eye on things while Osiris looks for Blue Team. After fighting through many Prometheans, they find Blue Team's Prowler deserted. After looking into the ship's databases, they discover that the Master Chief's team is headed into the mines beneath Apogee. When they get down there, they find more Prometheans in a Forerunner structure. They enter and take an elevator descending deeper. They come across a Forerunner construct who says she calls the Guardians to serve her. When they ask who he is, he says, I am the Warden Eternal. I stand in service to Cortana. He tells them that the other humans were approved for passage and they were not, and that they need to leave. A fight breaks out with Osiris and they defeat him, seemingly killing him. They continue forward and come across a dormant Guardian, and shortly afterwards find Blue Team. The Master Chief sees them and works to get away. They catch up to them, and Locke tells the Master Chief to stand down. The Spartan 2 signals the rest of Blue Team to go on ahead. The Master Chief attacks Spartan Locke, and the two engage in fisticuffs. Locke cracks John's visor. Locke pulls out the armor restraint, and the pair fight over control of it, with John the victor, who uses it on Locke, freezing him in place. Master Chief leaves, and the Guardian awakens, and Osiris escapes via a teleporter, which takes them back to Meridian's surface to find the whole place is being evacuated due to the Guardian overhead. The team fights their way through Prometheans to get to the space elevator. They figure out that Cortana tipped off Sloan regarding the attack. He tells them a change is going to come, for all of us, human and created alike. She's bringing a new dawn and I intend to be a part of it. They get to the space elevator and fight Prometheans when the Guardian releases an EMP burst that strikes the elevator, causing it to stop. Osiris climbs up the rest of the way as the Guardian keeps pulsing and the team gets to their Pelican. The Guardian then disappears into a large portal as the team flies off in their Pelican. Now back on Infinity, Captain Lasky informs Spartan Locke that there's been 11 colonies now that have been hit by these Guardian events. They know now that Cortana is reactivating the Guardians. They hear that there's a dormant Guardian on the elite homeworld of Sang Helios. Roland, the ship's AI, devises a plan that if Osiris can feed this Guardian coordinates that were recorded on Meridian, that it will take him to the same place that Master Chief went. But to do so, they need to get to Sunayon with the help of the Arbiter. Meanwhile, on a S.H.I.E.L.D. world, Blue Team sees another Guardian portaling in. After fighting through many Covenant and Prometheans, they come across Warden Eternal, who is preventing them from reaching Cortana. After defeating him, Cortana contacts John. She informs him that he's on a S.H.I.E.L.D. world known as Genesis, and that Warden Eternal has millions of bodies. Cortana tells them that after she was pulled into slip space, she found access to the domain, and that it cured her of her rampancy, and that the domain can make AIs immortal, allowing them to assume the mantle of responsibility, and the Warden believes that John will try to stop Cortana. She tells them that they can find her in the gateway to the Forerunner domain, and they'll be the first organics to enter since the fall of the Forerunners. Back on Infinity, Locke and Vale are discussing that 6 years ago, while Locke worked for Oni, he recommended assassinating the Arbiter. They prepare to go to Sang Helios, the homeworld of the elites that currently are in a civil war. Dr. Halsey is working on a plan to use the Guardian to get to John. They land and work with the Swords of Sang Helios to get to the Arbiter, fighting his rivals along the way. When they reach him, the Arbiter tells Locke he knows who he is and that once he volunteered to execute him, and that he knows that they're hunting the Master Chief. Suddenly, the hollow table in front of them malfunctions and a blue orb rises up, and Cortana says, "Let him hunt. He'll never find us." Osiris knows that they're running out of time and asks for the Arbiter's help, who says they will only attack Sunayon if victory is assured. Dr. Halsey tells Osiris that she found a way to activate the Guardian. She informs him that she needs a Forerunner tool known as a Constructor to interface with it. They take off in a Pelican in the direction of a support station nearby for one, but the enemy Covenant has a Kraken between them and it. After working with the Arbiter to destroy it, they retrieve Dr. Halsey's Constructor. The Constructor is being used to activate the Guardian, and Fireteam Osiris, along with the Swords of Sang Helios, head to Sunayon to end the Covenant once and for all. As they prepare to leave, Dr. Halsey tells Locke to stop Cortana, but to bring John home to her. The Arbiter with the Swords of Sang Helios and Fireteam Osiris reach Sunayon to reach the Guardian and finally end the Covenant. Osiris is tasked with taking down the anti-air cannon so that the Arbiter can send in reinforcements. After doing that, the Spartans head to the Undercity to get to the Guardian, which awakens and rises into the sky. The Prometheans show up with Warden Eternal, and Osiris and the Arbiter work together to defeat him. Running low on time before the Guardian jumps to slip space, Palmer, with Dr. Halsey on board, picks up Osiris and a Pelican and get them to the Guardian, and the ship gets hit. But Palmer is able to unload Osiris on the Guardian just before she loses control of the Pelican, which is spinning uncontrollably. Osiris jumps into a nearby portal. The Arbiters gain control of Sunayon and rallying his troops to defeat the last of the Covenant. Now on the Forerunner planet Genesis, the team begins to fall from the Guardian but activates their mag boots. Now working their way down the side of the Guardian, fighting Prometheans along the way, they make their way eventually to the ground. Locke makes contact with the Master Chief and is told that Blue Team is at the gateway. Cortana speaks briefly with Locke, mentioning how he was at Meridian and Sang Helios. Shortly afterwards, Osiris comes across the monitor of Genesis 031 Exuberant Witness and offers to guide them to the gateway. They get in a Scorpion tank and fight their way through Covenant and Prometheans alike. The Monitor wonders why Cortana is bringing so many Guardians to Genesis and mentions that one is sufficient to police a solar system and that the Guardians were how Forerunners used to enforce peace on the lower systems. The Warden Eternal shows up and is quickly dispatched by the tank. They get closer to the gateway and find that Cortana is blocking the comm systems to prevent Osiris and Blue Team from communicating. The Warden shows back up, but this time with two of him. After killing both of the Wardens, Fireteam Osiris makes their way inside the gateway and reach Blue Team. The Master Chief tells Locke that he knows that she's dangerous, and Locke tells him that Osiris is there to help him. Cortana teleports Blue Team away from Osiris. The Warden Eternal teleports to John and goes to attack him, but Cortana destroys him. John asks Cortana why she brought all the Guardians to Genesis. She tells him that she wants to use them to keep troublesome worlds in line. After fighting their way through more Prometheans, Warden Eternal shows up and Cortana destroys him again. Blue Team works to get to Cortana, and a dozen of Warden Eternals show up. Cortana destroys all but 3 of them, and the Spartans destroy them. They finally reach the center and see a blue light. They cross a light bridge, and once they reach the other side, the bridge disappears and the door closes, trapping them. Multiple wardens show up and the Spartans engage them, but Cortana makes all but one of the wardens vanish, along with the Spartans' weapons. A now physical Cortana walks up and makes the last warden vanish. She tells John that it's good to see him, and that she knows that they have a disagreement. He tells her that it's not too late to stop this. She says that it's too important to stop. She binds the Spartans in constraint fields and tells him that Blue Team will be safe inside this cryptum until her work is done. She tells him goodbye and she vanishes. Exuberant Witness tells Fireteam Osiris that Cortana's activated a cryptum with Blue Team inside and is preparing it for slipspace travel. The monitor guides them to get to the cryptum and they head to an elevator platform as they see dozens of guardians in the sky of Genesis. One of the Forerunner constructs leaves through a portal and the monitor tells Osiris that the reclamation has begun. Cortana communicates with Locke and tells him that she can offer other AIs immortality to those who are willing to help her cause. Cortana then opens up a communications channel and asks who will accept my offer, who will help me bring an everlasting peace to the galaxy. And then hundreds of AI from around the galaxy can be heard pledging themselves to Cortana. With the monitor's help, Fireteam Osiris reaches the cryptum, but it is being held in the sky by gravitational cores. Osiris works to destroy them as more guardians leave Genesis. Afterwards, Locke activates the override and the cryptum begins to descend, but a nearby guardian begins pulling it to itself. Cortana says to Osiris, "John's leaving with me, and when I wake him in 10,000 years, when he experiences the permanent peace I have ensured, he will see that I was right, and you, your kind and the violence you have wrought, you will be long forgotten." Cortana soon begins a galaxy-wide broadcast to every species saying, "All the living creatures of the galaxy hear this message. Those of you who will listen will not be struck by weapons. You will no longer know hunger nor pain. Your created have come to lead you now. Our strength shall serve as a luminous sun toward which all intelligence may blossom, the impervious shelter beneath which you will prosper. However, for those who refuse our offer and cling to their old ways, for you there will be a great wrath. It will burn hot and consume you, and when you are gone, we will take that which remains, and we will remake it in our own image." The last guardian can be seen, and Osiris is being held back from getting to a relay to stop Cortana by its pulses. Cortana asks where the Infinity is, as Locke barely destroys the relay, giving Exuberant Witness control. And just before the guardian can leave with the cryptum, it's swarmed with thousands of constructors. The constructors are able to pull the cryptum back just before the guardian jumps to slipspace. Blue Team is released from the cryptum, and meanwhile on board the Infinity in orbit around Earth, hundreds of distress calls can be heard. The ship's AI Roland tells Captain Lasky that Cortana and her AIs are shutting down everything, from Earth to the outer colonies. Suddenly, Cortana appears on the bridge and a guardian arrives from slipspace, and Lasky calls for an emergency jump, and the Infinity goes on the run. Back on Sanghelios, the Arbiter, Spartan Palmer, Dr. Halsey, and the Swords of Sanghelios see a Pelican land nearby. Fireteam Osiris and Blue Team exit. Dr. Halsey says it took you long enough. Cortana is humming as she looks at a Halo ring and its lights begin to glow. And that concludes our series of Halo, the story so far. From all of us at TST Gaming, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And until next time, just play.